The blizzard that swept through West Texas in January of 1884 brought more than just snow and ice to Sarah Ashford's doorstep. It brought a half-frozen cowboy who would change everything she thought she knew about loneliness. Sarah had been tending to her chickens when she first spotted the dark shape collapsed near her fence line, barely visible through the swirling white curtain of snow. At 23 years old, she had lived alone on her small homestead outside San Angelo for nearly 2 years, ever since her father had succumbed to pneumonia. She had learned to be cautious, to keep her rifle close, and to trust her instincts. But something about the way the figure lay motionless in the drifting snow made her forget caution entirely. She trudged through knee-deep snow, her skirts growing heavy with ice until she reached him. A man, young from what she could tell, his lips blue and his face pale as death. Snow had already begun to cover him like a burial shroud. She pressed her bare fingers against his neck, searching for a pulse, and felt the faintest flutter beneath his frozen skin. "Lord help me," she whispered, then set about the impossible task of dragging a full-grown man through a blizzard. It took her nearly 30 minutes to move him the 100 yards to her cabin, stopping every few feet to catch her breath and adjust her grip under his arms. By the time she got him through the door, her muscles screamed in protest, and her lungs burned from the frigid air. She pulled him close to the wood stove, then immediately set about building up the fire. She knew enough about cold to know you could not warm someone too quickly. Her father had taught her that after they had lost a ranch hand to freezing years ago. The man had been plunged into hot water and his heart had simply stopped. So Sarah worked methodically, removing the stranger's frozen outer clothes with shaking hands, wrapping him in every blanket she owned, and slowly, carefully, bringing warmth back to the small cabin. His clothes told her he was a working man worn denim pants, a simple cotton shirt beneath a leather vest, and boots that had seen better days. A gun belt lay coiled near where she had dropped his coat, the revolver still in its holster. She moved it to the far side of the room just to be safe, then returned to check his breathing. Throughout the night, Sarah kept vigil. She heated stones in the fire and wrapped them in cloth, placing them near his body. She made warm broth and managed to get small sips past his lips. She rubbed his hands and feet gently, watching for signs of frostbite. The blizzard raged outside, rattling the cabin's shutters and howling down the chimney. But inside, she fought her own battle against death. Dawn came gray and cold, the snow still falling though less violently than before. The stranger's color had improved slightly, and his breathing seemed stronger. Sarah allowed herself to doze in the chair beside him, exhausted from the night's efforts. She woke to the sound of movement. The man was trying to sit up, his eyes wide with confusion and alarm. They were remarkable eyes. She noticed a deep brown that seemed almost golden in the firelight. "Easy," she said, rising quickly from her chair. "You are safe. You nearly froze to death." He stared at her, then around the cabin, his body tense as though ready to bolt. "Where am I?" "My home, about 5 miles outside San Angelo. I found you collapsed by my fence line during the blizzard." Sarah kept her voice calm and steady. "Do you remember anything?" The man closed his eyes, his face tightening with effort. "Was riding. Horse spooked in the storm, through me." His eyes opened again, focusing on her with surprising intensity. "You saved my life. I could not very well leave you out there." Sarah moved to the stove, ladling some of the broth into a cup. "Can you drink this?" he nodded, accepting the cup with trembling hands. She noticed they were good hands, strong and calloused from work, but the fingers were still slightly blue at the tips. "I am Yates Aldridge," he said after taking a few sips. "I work for the Bar 7 Ranch, or I did before this storm hit. Sarah Ashford, this is my homestead." She settled back into her chair, suddenly aware of how improper this situation was. A strange man in her home, her hair undone and falling around her shoulders, wearing only her nightdress and a heavy wool shawl. But propriety seemed a distant concern when survival was at stake. "How long have I been here?" Yates asked. "I found you yesterday evening. It has been about 12 hours. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter. "The storm is still going, though not as fierce. You should rest more." But Yates was already trying to stand, pushing the blankets aside with determination that his body could not match. His legs buckled immediately, and Sarah lunged forward to catch him before he hit the floor. For a moment they were pressed together, her arms around his waist, his hands gripping her shoulders for balance, their faces mere inches apart. "I am sorry," Yates said, but he did not immediately pull away. Neither did Sarah. There was something in that moment, something that passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, or a promise of something neither could yet name. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with heat that had nothing to do with the fire. She helped him sit back down, acutely aware of the strength in his frame despite his weakened state. "You need to give yourself time," she said, her voice not quite steady. "You were nearly dead. Another hour in that storm and you would have been." Yates looked at her with those extraordinary eyes, and Sarah saw something shift in his expression. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why risk yourself for a stranger?" The question caught her off guard. She had not really considered it, she had simply acted on instinct. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said finally. "Because every life has value. Because I know what it is to be alone and desperate." Something in her words seemed to strike him deeply. Yates reached out and took her hand, his grip weak but earnest. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You owe me nothing." But Sarah did not pull her hand away. "Just get well." The storm continued for 2 more days, trapping them together in the small cabin. During that time, Sarah learned that Yates was 25 years old, originally from Missouri, and had been working cattle ranches in Texas for the past 3 years. He had no family, no ties, just the endless drift of a cowboy's life, moving from ranch to ranch, season to season. "It is a lonely way to live," he admitted on the second evening, sitting up now with blankets wrapped around his shoulders. The color had returned to his face and his strength was slowly rebuilding. "But it was all I knew. My parents died when I was 16. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I have been on my own since then." Sarah understood that loneliness. She told him about her father, about learning to run the homestead alone, about the weight of silence that filled the cabin most days. "People in town think I should sell and move to somewhere more civilized," she said, stirring the pot of stew that hung over the fire. "They think a woman alone cannot manage, but this land is all I have of my father. I cannot just give it up." "People think a lot of things that are not true," Yates said. "I have seen women run ranches better than any man. Strength is not just about muscle." The way he looked at her when he said it made Sarah's heart skip. She busied herself with the stew, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. This was dangerous territory, a stranger in her home, the forced intimacy of their situation. She should not be feeling these things, should not be noticing the way his hair fell across his forehead, or how his voice grew gentle when he spoke to her, or how his eyes followed her movements around the cabin with something that looked like wonder. On the 3rd day, the storm finally broke. Sunlight streamed through the windows, turning the snow-covered world outside into a field of diamonds. Yates stood at the window, looking out at the transformed landscape, and Sarah saw the conflict written clearly on his face. "I should go," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Try to find my horse, get back to the ranch." "Your horse is likely dead or miles away by now," Sarah said practically, "and the drifts are still too deep for travel. You would not make it a mile." Yates turned to face her. "I cannot keep imposing on your hospitality. It is not an imposition." The words came out more forcefully than Sarah intended. She took a breath, modulating her tone. "You are still recovering. Give it a few more days until the road's clear and you have your full strength back. I have the supplies, and honestly—" She hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I have appreciated the company." Something in Yates's expression softened. "As have I. More than you know." So he stayed. They fell into an easy rhythm over the following days. Yates insisted on helping with chores as soon as he was able, chopping wood for the fire and tending to the animals. Sarah protested that he was still recovering, but he was determined to earn his keep, as he put it. Working alongside him, Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in 2 years. Yates had a dry sense of humor and a gift for telling stories. He recounted tales from his years on the trail, close calls with rattlesnakes, stubborn cattle, and cowboys who thought they were tougher than they were. In turn, Sarah shared her own stories, memories of her father, and the challenges of running the homestead alone. "You talk about him with such love," Yates observed one evening. They were sitting by the fire after supper, the comfortable silence between them punctuated by the crackle of burning wood. "Your father, you were close." "He was everything to me after my mother died," Sarah said. "She passed when I was young, just 8 years old. After that, it was just the two of us. He taught me everything: how to shoot, how to work the land, how to stand on my own 2 feet. She smiled at the memories. "He used to say that I had twice the grit of any man he had ever met." "He was right," Yates said quietly. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known." The way he said it, with such simple conviction, made Sarah's breath catch. She looked at him across the fire and saw something in his eyes that made her pulse race. This was more than gratitude, more than the natural intimacy that comes from sharing close quarters. This was something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. "Yates," she began, not sure what she meant to say. He stood, crossing the small space between them in 2 strides. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, these past days with you have meant more to me than I can put into words. I know it is too soon. I know I have no right, but I have to say this." He took a deep breath. "When I was out there in that storm, I thought I was done. I thought that was it, dying alone in the snow with nothing to show for my life, no one to mourn me. It seemed fitting somehow. Empty." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the raw pain in his voice. "But then I woke up here and you were there, and for the first time in 9 years, I felt like maybe my life could mean something. You gave me more than warmth and shelter, Sarah. You gave me a reason to keep going." His grip on her hands tightened. "I do not want to leave here and go back to drifting. I do not want to spend the rest of my days alone, moving from place to place with no purpose. I want to stay. I want to help you with this homestead. I want to build something here with you if you will have me." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its vulnerability. Sarah felt her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. Part of her wanted to be cautious, to protect herself, to remember that she had known this man for less than a week. But another part, a deeper, truer part, recognized something in Yates that called to her own lonely soul. "I barely know you," she whispered, but her hands remained in his. "Then let me stay and change that. Let me prove myself to you." Yates raised one of her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I am not a rich man. I have nothing to offer but hard work and honest devotion. But if you give me a chance, Sarah, I swear I will spend every day trying to be worthy of what you did for me." Sarah felt a tear slip down her cheek. She had been alone for so long, had convinced herself that she was content with solitude, that she did not need anyone else. But Yates was offering her something she had not even known she was missing: a partner, a companion, someone to share the burden and the beauty of life on the frontier. "You can stay," she said softly. "Stay and we will see where this leads." The smile that broke across Yates's face was like the sun coming out after the storm. He stood, pulling her to her feet, and for a long moment they simply stood there, hands clasped, looking at each other with wonder and hope. "I will not let you down," Yates promised. "Just do not freeze to death again," Sarah said, trying to lighten the intensity of the moment. "I am not sure my heart could take finding you like that twice." Yates laughed, and the sound filled the cabin with warmth. "No, madam, once was quite enough." The weeks that followed were unlike anything Sarah had experienced. True to his word, Yates threw himself into the work of the homestead with tireless dedication. He repaired the fence line that had been damaged in the storm, reinforced the chicken coop against predators, and chopped enough wood to last them through the rest of winter and well into spring. But more than the physical labor, it was his presence itself that transformed Sarah's life. There was comfort in the small moments: waking to find coffee already brewing, hearing him humming as he worked outside, sharing meals across the rough wooden table. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's habits and histories, dreams and disappointments. Yates had a thoughtful nature beneath his cowboy exterior, and he listened to Sarah's opinions with genuine interest, never dismissing her thoughts the way some men might. As winter gradually loosened its grip, and the first hints of spring appeared in the Texas landscape, something else was blooming between them. The touches grew more frequent and lingered longer: his hand at the small of her back as he passed her in the cabin, her fingers brushing his as she handed him his coffee, shoulders touching as they sat by the fire in the evenings. One evening in early March, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Yates asked Sarah to walk with him. They strolled out past the barn, their breath still visible in the cooling air, until they reached a small rise that overlooked her property. From here, you could see the cabin, the outbuildings, the fenced pastures, and beyond that, the endless roll of Texas prairie. "It is beautiful," Yates said, but he was looking at Sarah, not the view. She felt her cheeks warm despite the chill. "Yates, I love you, Sarah." The words were simple, direct, utterly sincere. "I know we have only known each other for 2 months, and maybe that seems too fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are everything to me. You are my home, my purpose, my reason for being." Sarah felt tears well up, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling for you that first night, even though you were half dead and could barely speak. There was just something about you, something that felt right." Yates cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palms. "Marry me, Sarah. Let me be your husband, your partner in all things. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you and building a life with you." "Yes," Sarah breathed. "Yes, Yates, yes." He kissed her then, and it was like coming home after a long journey. His lips were warm and soft, and Sarah melted into the embrace, feeling safe and cherished and loved in a way she had never experienced before. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "We should do this properly," Yates said, his forehead resting against hers. "Go into town, see the preacher, make it official." "Tomorrow," Sarah agreed. "We will go tomorrow." That night they sat by the fire holding hands, making plans for their future. They would expand the homestead, maybe get some cattle of their own, build a larger house as their family grew. Yates spoke of the life he wanted to give her, and Sarah felt her heart swell with joy at the thought of sharing her days with this remarkable man, who had literally dropped into her life during a blizzard. The next morning, they hitched up Sarah's horse to the small wagon and made the journey into San Angelo. The town was bustling with activity, people enjoying the break from winter's harshness. They went straight to the church and found Reverend Morris in his study, reviewing his Sunday sermon. "Miss Ashford," the Reverend said, looking up in surprise, "I have not seen you in town for weeks. We were getting worried about you during those storms." "I am fine, Reverend. Better than fine, actually." Sarah glanced at Yates, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. "This is Yates Aldridge. We would like you to marry us." Reverend Morris's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Marry you? But I was not aware you were courting anyone, Sarah." Over the next few minutes, they explained the situation: how Sarah had found Yates during the blizzard, how he had stayed to help with the homestead, how they had fallen in love. The Reverend listened with growing amazement, occasionally interjecting with questions or expressions of concern about propriety. "It is highly irregular," he said finally. "Having a strange man living in your home unchaperoned, Sarah. People will talk." "Let them talk," Sarah said firmly. "Yates is a good man, and he saved my homestead this winter. More than that, he saved me from a life of loneliness. I love him and I want to marry him. Will you perform the ceremony or not?" The Reverend looked between them, seeing the determination in Sarah's face and the devoted way Yates looked at her. Finally, he sighed. "Very well, but we should at least have some witnesses. Let me send for the church deacon and his wife." Within the hour, Sarah and Yates stood before Reverend Morris in the small church, with Deacon Andrews and his wife Martha as witnesses. Sarah wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and Yates had cleaned up as best he could in his work clothes. It was not a fancy ceremony, but it was heartfelt and true. When Yates slipped a simple gold band onto Sarah's finger, purchased quickly from the general store with the last of his saved wages, she felt tears of joy stream down her face. And when Reverend Morris pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with such tenderness that even Martha Andrews dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. They celebrated with a meal at the town's small restaurant, then purchased supplies before heading back to the homestead. As they rode home in the wagon, Sarah leaned against Yates's shoulder, feeling more content than she had ever thought possible. "Mrs. Aldridge," Yates said, testing out the sound of it. "I like the sound of that," Sarah replied with a smile. "So do I." He kissed the top of her head. "So do I." Their first night as a married couple was spent in the cabin that had sheltered them through the winter. Yates had been sleeping in the barn since recovering his strength, insisting on propriety despite the unusual circumstances. But now, finally, they could truly share the small home and the even smaller bed. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the connection that had been building between them for weeks. Afterward, lying in each other's arms with moonlight streaming through the window, Sarah felt a sense of completeness she had not known was possible. "Thank you," Yates whispered into her hair. "For what? For seeing me. For giving me a chance. For making me believe that I could have this love, a home, a purpose beyond just surviving day to day." His arms tightened around her. "You made me want to live again, Sarah. Really live, not just exist." Sarah turned in his arms so she could look at his face. "You did the same for me. I did not realize how lonely I was until you were here to fill that emptiness. You are my everything, Yates Aldridge." They kissed again, sealing the promise they had made to each other, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that saving this cowboy from the storm had been the best thing she had ever done. Spring arrived in full force, transforming the brown prairie into a sea of wildflowers, bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, and Mexican hats, creating a tapestry of color. Sarah and Yates worked side by side, planting a larger garden than she had managed alone, repairing winter damage, and planning improvements to the property. Yates proved to be an excellent hand with horses, and they used his connections from the Bar 7 ranch to purchase 3 mares at a good price. His plan was to breed quality horses for sale, supplementing the income from Sarah's chickens and the small herd of cattle they hoped to acquire. "We will build something real here," Yates said one evening, surveying their land with pride. "Something that will last." News of their marriage had indeed spread through San Angelo, and reactions were mixed. Some of the more conservative townspeople clucked their tongues at the impropriety of the whole situation. But others, particularly those who remembered Sarah's father and respected the grit it took for a woman to run a homestead alone, were supportive. Martha Andrews, the deacon's wife, became a particular friend. She visited the homestead several times that spring, bringing preserves and advice in equal measure. She was a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Do not listen to the gossips," she told Sarah during one visit, sitting at the kitchen table while Sarah kneaded bread dough. "Anyone with eyes can see that you and Yates are genuinely in love. The way that man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars, that is not something you can fake." "People say we barely knew each other before we married," Sarah said, punching down the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "People say all sorts of foolish things." Martha sipped her coffee. "My William and I courted for 2 years before we married, and we still had plenty to learn about each other afterward. Time is no guarantee of anything. What matters is commitment, respect, and love. From what I can see, you and Yates have all 3. Sarah smiled at the older woman. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Through Martha, Sarah and Yates began to integrate more into the San Angelo community. They attended church services most Sundays, and Sarah joined the ladies' auxiliary. Yates, meanwhile, found work helping some of the neighboring ranchers with various projects, building a reputation as a reliable hand and honest man. The extra income helped them save toward their dream of expanding the homestead. By summer, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited until she was certain before telling Yates. She chose a warm evening in June after a satisfying day's work. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, a habit they had developed, taking time each day to simply be together and appreciate what they had built. "Yates, I have something to tell you." The seriousness in her tone made him turn to look at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am wonderful." Sarah took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Yates just stared at her, his mouth slightly open as though he could not quite process the words. Then his face transformed with such pure joy that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby." His voice was reverent, awed. "We are going to be parents." "Yes," Sarah laughed through her tears. "Sometime around January, I think." Yates let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every bird within half a mile. He scooped Sarah up in his arms and spun her around, then immediately set her down with a look of panic. "Oh God, I should not have done that. Are you okay? Did I hurt you? Should you be sitting down?" His concern was so endearing that Sarah laughed. "I am fine. I am pregnant, not made of glass." But Yates was already ushering her back to her chair, fussing over her like a mother hen. That night, lying in bed with his hand resting protectively on her stomach, he spoke softly about his dreams for their child. "I want them to know they are loved," he said. "I want them to grow up in a home full of warmth and laughter. I want to teach them to ride, to work the land, to be strong and kind and true. I want to give them everything I never had: stability, security, parents who will always be there." Sarah felt tears slip down her temples. You are going to be an amazing father. I hope so." His voice was thick with emotion. "This child is going to have the best mother in the world, that is for certain. You saved my life, Sarah, and now you are giving me the greatest gift imaginable. A family. A real family of my own." They held each other in the darkness, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of the blessing they had been given, both determined to build the kind of life and home they had each dreamed of during their lonely years. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. Sarah continued working the homestead, though Yates became increasingly protective, insisting on taking over the heavier tasks. They spent the cooler autumn evenings preparing for the baby's arrival, converting a corner of the cabin into a nursery area and building a beautiful cradle from oak wood. "My father was a carpenter before he became a rancher," Yates explained as he carefully sanded the wood smooth. "He taught me some basics when I was young. I always thought it was useless information for a cowboy, but I am glad I remember it now." Sarah ran her hand over the smooth wood, admiring the craftsmanship. "It is perfect. Our baby will sleep in something made by their father's hands." As her belly grew round with their child, Sarah felt more connected to Yates than ever. He was attentive and loving, constantly amazed by the changes in her body, by the miracle of the life growing inside her. He would talk to her stomach in the evenings, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch, about Sarah's bravery, about the life they would all share. December brought cold weather again, and Sarah felt a strange symmetry in the changing season. It had been almost exactly a year since that blizzard, since she had found Yates half frozen by her fence line. So much had changed in 12 months. She had gone from being alone to being married and about to become a mother. It seemed impossible that one stormy day could have altered the entire course of her life, but here was the proof. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire in the warm cabin, Sarah's head resting on Yates's shoulder, his hand on her swollen belly. "You remember last Christmas?" Sarah asked softly. "I barely remember it at all," Yates admitted. "I was in a bunkhouse with 20 other cowboys, playing cards and drinking rot-gut whiskey. It was just another night, meaningless and empty like all the rest." He kissed her temple. "This Christmas, I have everything that matters: a wife I adore, a child on the way, a home I have helped build with my own hands. It does not seem real sometimes. I keep thinking I will wake up back in that snowdrift, and this will all have been a fever dream." "It is real," Sarah assured him, guiding his hand to where the baby was kicking. "Feel that? That is very real." Yates laughed with delight at the strong kicks against his palm. "Our baby is feisty. Takes after both of us then." They spent Christmas Day quietly, just the two of them, preparing a special meal and exchanging small handmade gifts. Yates gave Sarah a wooden box he had crafted, inlaid with her initials. Sarah gave him a new shirt she had sewn, embroidered with his name on the collar. They were simple presents, but given with love and received with joy. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," Yates said, holding Sarah close. "The first of many," Sarah replied. The baby arrived on a cold January night during another snowstorm. Sarah's labor began just after supper, and Yates immediately rode through the falling snow to fetch Martha Andrews, who had experience with childbirth and had promised to help when the time came. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Yates paced the cabin like a caged animal, desperate to help but able to do nothing but hold Sarah's hand and whisper encouragement during the worst of the contractions. He had faced angry bulls, ornery horses, and harsh weather without flinching, but watching the woman he loved in pain nearly undid him. "You are doing so well, sweetheart," he murmured, smoothing damp hair back from her forehead. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do this." Finally, as the storm began to clear and weak winter sunlight filtered through the windows, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. Martha placed the squalling infant on Sarah's chest, and both parents stared in wonder at the tiny person they had created. "A boy," Sarah breathed, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "We have a son." Yates could not speak. He simply knelt beside the bed, one hand gently touching his son's impossibly small back, the other gripping Sarah's hand. His shoulders shook with silent sobs of joy and relief and overwhelming love. They named him William, after Sarah's father. William Aldridge came into the world during a snowstorm, just as his father had come into Sarah's life during a blizzard, and the symmetry of it felt right somehow, like the closing of a circle. The early weeks of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Sarah recovered slowly from the birth, and Yates took over running the homestead almost entirely, as well as helping with the baby whenever he could. He proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle with his son, willing to walk the floor for hours when William was fussy, singing soft cowboy songs in his rumbling voice until the baby settled. "You were made for this," Sarah said one night, watching Yates rock their son in the cradle he had built. "I never thought I would get to have this," Yates replied softly. "A family, a son to teach and protect. It still amazes me every single day." As William grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling baby, Sarah and Yates fell into the rhythms of family life. The homestead prospered under their joint efforts. The horse breeding operation that Yates had started was showing promise, with 2 foals born that spring that already had buyers interested. Sarah's garden produced abundantly, and she began selling preserves and baked goods in town to supplement their income. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, happy. Their love had deepened with time and shared experience, growing from that initial spark into something solid and enduring. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating successes together. The San Angelo community had fully accepted them now. Yates was respected as a skilled horseman and reliable hand, Sarah as a capable woman and devoted mother. They attended church socials and town events, and their home became known for its warm hospitality. Martha Andrews remained a close friend, as did several other families in the area. When William was 6 months old, crawling around the cabin and getting into everything, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news brought no surprise, only joy. They had both talked about wanting more children, about filling their home with love and laughter. "Looks like William is going to be a big brother," Yates said, pulling Sarah into his arms. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not even begin to cover it. Yates kissed her deeply. "Every day with you is a gift, Sarah. Every day, I wake up and remember that I am the luckiest man alive." Their daughter was born in October of 1886, on a beautiful autumn day when the trees were turning gold and the air was crisp and clear. The labor was shorter and easier than with William, and by evening, Sarah was sitting up in bed with their daughter in her arms, watching Yates introduce William to his new sister. "Gentle," Yates instructed the toddler, helping guide his chubby hand to stroke the baby's soft hair. "This is your sister. You are going to help Mama and Papa take care of her." William, not quite 2 years old, looked fascinated by this tiny creature. "Baby," he said, one of his few clear words. "That is right, baby sister." Yates looked at Sarah over their children's heads, his eyes shining. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on one. Now, looking at their daughter's delicate features, Sarah said, "I was thinking Sophia, Sophie for short." Sophia Aldridge. Yates tested it out. It is perfect. She is perfect. You are perfect. He leaned over to kiss Sarah's forehead. Thank you for this, for all of it. With two small children, life became busier and more chaotic, but neither Sarah nor Yates would have changed a thing. Their cabin rang with children's laughter, with William's endless questions and Sophie's baby babbling. They were building the life they had both dreamed of, filling their home with the love and warmth that each had lacked during their lonely years. As the children grew, Yates taught William to ride on a gentle old mare. The boy's face lit up with joy as he sat in front of his father in the saddle. Sarah taught both children their letters, determined that they would have the education she had been fortunate enough to receive from her father. The homestead continued to prosper. By 1888, they had expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land when it became available. The horse operation had grown into a genuine business, with buyers coming from as far as Austin and San Antonio to look at Yates's well-trained animals. Sarah's reputation for excellent preserves and baked goods meant she could barely keep up with demand from the general store in town. They were successful, but more than that, they were happy. Their marriage had not lost its passion despite the demands of parenthood and running a ranch. They still found time for quiet moments together, still looked at each other with love and desire, still talked late into the night about their dreams and plans. One evening in the summer of 1888, after putting the children to bed, Sarah and Yates sat on the porch watching the sunset, as had been their custom since their first days together. Sarah was 30 years old now, Yates 32, and they had been married for over 4 years. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked, leaning against Yates's shoulder. "Giving up the cowboy life, you could have recovered and left, gone back to drifting from ranch to ranch." Yates was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Not for a single second," he finally said. "That life was empty, Sarah. I was just going through the motions, not really living. I thought it was freedom, but it was just loneliness with a different name." He turned to look at her, his eyes intense in the fading light. "You gave me something to live for. You made me want to build instead of drift, to put down roots instead of always moving on. You saved me from more than just freezing to death in that storm. You saved me from a life of meaninglessness." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all this time, his words could move her so deeply. "You saved me too. I did not realize how much I needed someone until you were here. I had convinced myself I was fine alone, but I was just surviving, not thriving. You brought joy back into my life." They kissed as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Sarah felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt that first time when he had knelt before her and told her she was his reason to keep going. Over the next few years, their family continued to grow. Another son arrived in 1889, whom they named Samuel. Then twin girls in 1891, Emma and Elizabeth. The cabin that had once housed just Sarah became filled to bursting with children's energy and noise. Yates expanded it twice, adding rooms and a proper second story, turning the humble homestead into a real family home. By 1893, when Sarah was 35 and Yates was 37, they had 5 children ranging in age from 12-year-old William to the 2-year-old twins. The homestead had grown into one of the most successful small ranches in the area. They employed 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and their horses were sought after throughout Texas. But despite their success and busy household, Sarah and Yates never lost sight of what mattered most, each other and the family they had created together. They still made time for their evening talks on the porch, still looked at each other with love and desire, still marveled at how a chance snowstorm had brought them together, and changed both their lives forever. One winter evening, almost exactly 10 years after that fateful blizzard, they sat together after putting the younger children to bed. William was old enough now to stay up a bit later, reading by lamplight at the table while his parents talked quietly. 10 years, Sarah said softly. Can you believe it has been 10 years since I found you half frozen by the fence? Best day of my life, Yates replied immediately. Well, the day I woke up and saw you was the best day, the freezing part I could have done without. Sarah laughed as he had intended. I was so scared when I found you. I thought you were already dead. I would have been if not for you. Yates pulled her closer. Everything good in my life stems from that moment when you decided to risk yourself to save a stranger. My wife, my children, my home, my purpose, all of it exists because you have a good heart, Sarah Aldridge. And because you chose to stay, Sarah pointed out. You could have left once you recovered. You chose this life, chose me. Easiest choice I ever made. Yates kissed her temple. You are my home, Sarah. Wherever you are, that is where I belong. From the table, William looked up from his book. Are you two being mushy again? He asked with the particular disdain that 12-year-old boys have for parental affection. Yes, we are, Yates replied without embarrassment. Someday you will understand, son. When you find the right person, you will not care who sees you being mushy. William made a face and returned to his book, and Sarah and Yates smiled at each other, hands clasped, hearts full. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. William grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's thoughtful nature. He showed a natural aptitude for working with horses and became Yates's right-hand man on the ranch. Sophie inherited Sarah's head for business, and by age 15 was managing the books for the ranch's horse sales. Samuel had a gift for growing things and took over expanding the garden into a genuine farm operation. The twins, Emma and Elizabeth, were still young but already showing distinct personalities, Emma bold and adventurous, Elizabeth gentle and artistic. Sarah and Yates watched their children grow with pride and wonder, marveling at the distinct individuals they were becoming. They had achieved what they had both dreamed of: a large, loving family, a successful homestead, and a partnership built on love and mutual respect. In the spring of 1895, William announced that he was courting a young woman from town, the daughter of the general store owner. Her name was Lucy, and she was a sweet-natured girl with a quick smile. When William brought her home to meet his parents, Sarah saw the way her son looked at Lucy and recognized the same adoration she saw in Yates's eyes when he looked at her. He is so young, Sarah said that night, though William was 20 years old, older than she had been when she married Yates. He knows his own heart, Yates replied, just like we did. William and Lucy married that summer in a beautiful ceremony at the church in San Angelo. The whole town came out to celebrate, and Sarah felt tears of joy stream down her face as she watched her firstborn son pledge his life to the woman he loved. Yates stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and whispered, "We did good with him." "We did good with all of them," Sarah replied, looking at Sophie and Samuel and the twins, all dressed in their finest clothes, all growing up so fast. William and Lucy built a house on the edge of the ranch property, and William continued working with his father breeding and training horses. Within a year, they announced that Sarah and Yates were going to be grandparents, and the cycle of life continued its beautiful progression. By 1900, as the new century dawned, Sarah and Yates were in their mid-40s, with married children and 3 grandchildren. Their hair was showing gray now, and the physical work of the ranch was harder than it used to be, but they were healthy and happy, surrounded by family and the life they had built together. One evening that summer, they took a walk together up to the rise where Yates had first told Sarah he loved her, all those years ago. It had become a special place for them, somewhere they went when they wanted to remember and celebrate their journey together. "Look at all this," Yates said, gesturing at the ranch spread out below them. The original cabin was now the center of a cluster of buildings: the expanded main house, barns, outbuildings, and the small house where William and Lucy lived with their children. "We built all of this." "We did," Sarah agreed, taking his hand. "From one cabin and a half-frozen cowboy to all of this." Yates laughed. "When you put it like that, it sounds pretty impressive." "It is impressive." Sarah looked up at him, seeing the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes from years of smiling, the strength still evident in his frame despite the passing years. He was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "You are impressive. The life we have built together is impressive. The family we created is impressive." "I love you," Yates said simply. "I have loved you since the moment I woke up and saw your face. I will love you until the day I die, and beyond that if there is anything after. You are everything to me, Sarah, my wife, my partner, my heart." "And you are mine," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You made me believe in love, Yates. You showed me that life is better when shared with someone who truly sees you and cherishes you. You are the best husband, the best father, the best man I have ever known." They kissed as the sun set, just as they had so many times before, and Sarah felt the same rush of love and desire that she had felt on their wedding night. Time had not diminished what they shared. It had only deepened it, tempering their love like steel in a forge. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren arrived, and the ranch continued to prosper. Yates and Sarah gradually handed over more of the daily operations to William and Sophie, who had married a local rancher and whose husband had joined the family business. They had built something that would last beyond them, a legacy of love and hard work. In the winter of 1910, Sarah and Yates celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary. They were in their 50s now, officially elders of both their family and the San Angelo community. The ranch had grown into one of the most respected horse breeding operations in West Texas, and the Aldridge name was synonymous with quality and integrity. Their children were all grown and married, giving them a total of 12 grandchildren, with another on the way. The main house rang with noise during family gatherings, with multiple generations sharing meals and stories, laughter echoing off the walls. On the evening of their anniversary, after all the family had gone home and it was just the two of them again, Sarah and Yates sat in the parlor of the house that Yates had built with his own hands. A fire crackled in the hearth, and they sat close together on the settee, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. 26 years, Sarah mused. "More than half my life now." "The best half," Yates said. "Definitely the best half." Sarah smiled. "Do you remember what you said to me that night when you proposed? You said you wanted to spend every day trying to be worthy of what I did for you." "I remember." Yates's voice was soft with memory. "You have more than fulfilled that promise. You have given me everything I ever dreamed of and more besides. You have been the perfect husband, Yates, the perfect father, the perfect partner in all things." Yates turned to look at her, his eyes still as warm and loving as they had been 26 years ago when he first told her he loved her. "It has been easy to keep that promise because I have been married to you. You make me want to be better, to do better, to build something lasting and good. You are my reason for everything, Sarah. You always have been, from that first moment I woke up and saw you." They kissed, slow and sweet, a kiss that held 26 years of love and devotion, of shared joys and weathered sorrows, of children raised and dreams achieved. When they pulled apart, both had tears on their cheeks. I would do it all again, Sarah whispered. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would do it all again just to end up here with you. So would I, Yates replied. 1,000 times over I would choose you. They sat together as the fire burned low, hands clasped, hearts full, grateful for the blizzard that had brought them together and the love that had sustained them through decades of life's joys and challenges. The years that followed were gentler. Sarah and Yates fully retired from running the ranch, leaving it in the capable hands of their children and grandchildren. They spent their days tending a large garden, hosting family gatherings, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had earned their rest, and they took it gladly, but they remained active in the community and in their families' lives. On cold winter evenings, Yates would sometimes tell his grandchildren the story of how he met their grandmother, recounting the blizzard and how Sarah had saved his life. The children would listen with wide eyes, even though they had heard the story dozens of times before. It never got old because it was a true love story, the foundation upon which their entire family had been built. Sarah would always add her own perspective, talking about finding this half-frozen cowboy and deciding in that moment to fight for his life, even though he was a complete stranger. Sometimes, she would tell the children, you just know when something is right, even if you cannot explain why. I looked at your grandfather lying in that snow, and something in my heart told me he was important, that I could not let him die. And I woke up and saw this angel of mercy. Yates would continue, pulling Sarah close, and I knew that God had given me a second chance at life. I knew I had to make it count. As they entered their 60s, both Sarah and Yates remained in relatively good health. They moved a bit slower, needed afternoon naps, and could no longer do heavy physical work, but they were still vital and engaged with life. They took joy in watching their grandchildren grow, in celebrating new births and weddings, in the continuing success of the ranch they had built. In 1920, they celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary and Sarah's 62nd birthday. The whole family gathered for a huge celebration, with children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filling every corner of the house. Looking around at the crowd of people who existed, because she had found a cowboy freezing in a blizzard 36 years ago, Sarah felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after everyone had left and they were preparing for bed, Yates pulled Sarah into his arms and slow danced with her in the middle of their bedroom, humming an old waltz tune. She laughed and followed his lead, and they swayed together in the lamplight, still very much in love after all these years. "What was that for?" Sarah asked when they finally stopped, both slightly breathless. "Just wanted to hold my beautiful wife," Yates replied. "Wanted to remember what it felt like when we were young and first falling in love." "We are not so old," Sarah protested. "No, we are not." Yates cupped her face in his weathered hands. "And I am still falling in love with you every single day." They made love that night with the gentle passion of long familiarity, knowing every touch that pleased the other, moving together with the ease of decades of practice. Afterward, lying in each other's arms in the darkness, Sarah felt profoundly blessed. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For staying, for building this life with me, for loving me so well for so long." Yates kissed her forehead. "The privilege has been all mine." As they drifted off to sleep, hands clasped even in slumber, neither could have imagined their life turning out any better. They had found love in the most unexpected way, built a family and a legacy that would endure for generations, and created a partnership that had stood the test of time. The 1920s brought changes to Texas and to San Angelo. Automobiles became common. Electricity started reaching even rural areas, and the world that Sarah and Yates had known in their youth seemed to be fading into history. But some things remained constant: family, love, hard work, and the satisfaction of a life well lived. As they entered their 70s, age finally began to slow them down more noticeably. Yates developed arthritis in his hands, the same hands that had built their house and trained countless horses. Sarah's eyesight weakened, making the needlework she loved more difficult. But they adapted, finding new ways to contribute and stay engaged with their family and community. They spent more time simply sitting together, reminiscing about their long life together, marveling at all they had experienced. They had lived through the end of the Old West, through wars and depressions and technological revolutions. They had seen their family grow from just the two of them to a sprawling clan of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They had built something lasting from nothing but love and determination. On a cold January evening in 1925, almost exactly 41 years after Sarah had found Yates in the blizzard, they sat together on the porch wrapped in heavy blankets. It was the anniversary of the day they met, and they always marked it quietly, just the two of them, remembering. 41 years, Yates said, his voice rougher now with age but still warm. Seems like yesterday and like forever ago at the same time. I remember everything about that day, Sarah said. How scared I was when I found you, how heavy you were to drag through the snow, how I prayed all night that you would survive. And I remember waking up and thinking I had died and gone to heaven because an angel was taking care of me. Yates squeezed her hand gently. I have never stopped being grateful, Sarah, not for a single day. We have had a good life, Sarah said softly, the best life. Yates looked at her, and even with the weight of years on both of them, she could still see the young cowboy who had looked at her with such love and devotion. And it is not over yet. We still have time, and I intend to love you for every second of it. They sat together as the stars came out, two people who had defied loneliness and loss to find each other and build something beautiful. They had saved each other in that blizzard so long ago. Sarah had saved Yates's life, and he had saved her from a lifetime of solitude. Together, they had made each other whole. As they finally went inside, out of the cold, Yates paused to look back at the land they had transformed over 4 decades. The ranch stretched out in the darkness, solid and permanent, a testament to what love and hard work could accomplish. He thought about the lost, drifting cowboy he had been, and the man he had become because one brave woman had refused to let him die in the snow. He turned back to Sarah, taking her hand, and together they walked into their warm home, surrounded by the evidence of their life together: photographs of children and grandchildren, furniture they had chosen together, walls they had painted, floors they had walked across 10,000 times. This was home, built not just with wood and nails, but with love and commitment and the daily choice to be partners in all things. That night, lying in bed with Sarah tucked against his side, Yates felt a deep sense of peace and completion. If his life ended tomorrow, he would die a happy man, knowing he had loved well and been loved in return, had built something lasting, had made a difference in the world through his family and his work. But Yates Aldridge had many more years ahead of him, as did Sarah. They would live to celebrate their golden anniversary, surrounded by scores of descendants. They would see the world continue to change and modernize while their love remained constant. They would face the inevitable sorrows of age, losing friends, dealing with health problems, watching the world of their youth disappear. But through it all, they would have each other. The cowboy Sarah had saved from freezing, and the woman who had given him a reason to live would face whatever came together, hand in hand, heart to heart, until the very end of their days. And when that end finally came, peaceful and quiet in their old age, they would leave behind a legacy of love that would echo through generations. Their descendants would tell the story of how they met for decades after they were gone, passing down the tale of the blizzard and the rescue, of how one act of compassion had sparked a love that built a family and changed countless lives. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would grow up knowing that they existed, because Sarah Ashford had refused to let a stranger die in the snow, and because Yates Aldridge had woken up and decided to make her his reason to live. It was a love story for the ages, born in the harsh reality of a West Texas winter, and sustained through decades of daily choice and commitment. It was proof that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that two lonely people could find each other and build something beautiful together, that saving someone's life could mean saving your own. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled around the ranch house that Yates had built and the snow fell soft and silent, you could almost feel there present still two souls who had found each other against all odds and loved each other until the very end.